Mr. Chairman, we are streaming live on YouTube and on Zoom. You may begin when you're ready.
Good morning. Welcome to the February MPO Technical Advisory Committee meeting. I want to remind our committee members that these meetings are in person to have a quorum. Members attending online may not vote, but may comment and participate in discussion. And to participate virtually, please use the raise hand feature. So moving on to chair's announcements. There are 2 public comment points in this meeting. I do also have 1 additional comment prior to turning it over to Slade for agenda review. Today will actually be my last TAC meeting as I will be leaving City of Winter Park in April. And I'll be headed to Virginia. So if you know any civil engineers in Virginia, please let me know. I would love to network and connect. Lastly, I'm very grateful and thankful to serve this committee for about 5 years and to have served this committee as the chair. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look to MPO staff for a smooth transition regarding chair and vice chair. I learned a lot from everyone of you, each and every one of you, and MPO staff, so thank you. And with that, I will turn this over to Slade for agenda review.
All right, thanks, Hong. And just on a personal note, before we get started with MPO announcemements, I want to thank Hong for his tenure as chair, but also for your time serving on TAC. You're a good partner, good to work with. So we're sad to see you go, but it's Virginia's gain. So have fun up there. As far as more administrative matters go, in sticking with the TAC bylaws, our vice chair, Lenny Barden, will move up to chairman for our next meeting. I talked to him before the meeting, made sure I wasn't blindsided by that. But we'll have an election for a new vice chair at our next TAC meeting, just keep the members of leadership in place. So we'll hear more about that before the next meeting. So on to MPO announcements and agenda review. The 2050 MTP Summit will be held in person on Wednesday, April 9th at the Lake Mary Event Center. You can find the address up there on the screen. This meeting will bring together all the Metro Plan Orlando Board and Advisory Committee members for joint discussion on funding scenarios for the 2050 plan. This is a chance for board and committee members to provide feedback and recommendations on this important aspect of our plan. Please make plans to attend in person at the Lake Mary Event Center. And also note that the following day on April 10th is the MTP workshop, which will still be happening virtually. Next up, wanted to let you know about the Federal Highway Administration's new speed limit setting handbook, which provides users with information on how to conduct an engineering study to set a non-statutory speed limit and speed. You can find out more and download the full handbook at the link up there on the screen, and I believe in the general information section of your agenda packet. Next up, we have so the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, COMTO, has their annual Careers in Transportation for Youth internship program. Applications are now open for that. If you happen to know any students that are looking for internships or looking to find out more about the transportation industry, or if your agency is interested in hosting an intern, those applications are open now. COMTO is the leading national advocate for a transportation industry that serves all communities, advancing training and professional development to ensure a highly skilled workforce, and promotes internships for the next generation of transportation leaders. So information on the applications for both students and host agencies is located at your place on the table. There's also additional information on the table by the entrance to the boardroom. You can also check in with Eric Hill, who raised his hand. Go for it, Eric.
Good morning, committee members and Mr. Chairman. I failed to provide information at your place, but I will follow up this meeting with a message to you with information on COPTO's internship program.
Thanks, Eric. All right. And lastly, we have a CAC webinar on Wednesday, March 19th with a presentation from Mike Wilson on cycling. Mike's presentation will cover the factors that affect bicycle transportation, crash data, and risk factors, with special attention on cyclist speed as a risk factor and strategies for reducing cyclist crash risk. This webinar is intended for our Community Advisory Committee members, but it is open to the public. Wanted to put it on your radar in case you wanted to attend, and you know, knowledge is always a good thing. So speaking of our safety moment, I'll turn it over to Mike. Thanks.
Thank you, Slade. Good morning, everyone. Starting tomorrow is Florida Bike Month. The rest of the country does it in May, but we do March because it's a little cooler here and because we're Florida, right? So this time around, I want to talk about lighting at night. About a quarter of bicyclist travel happens at night, but over half of the bicyclist fatalities, and nearly 3/4 of our overtaking fatal crashes are at night. We actually have exposure data where we were able to calculate that for both the fatal and serious overtaking crashes, that risk is 5 times higher for nighttime. Some interesting and concerning numbers on the trend data. Looking over the past 10 years, we've seen about a 10% increase overall in daytime bike crashes, but you see nearly 40% increase for nighttime, and similar increases for the serious crashes. It's interesting because bicycle lighting has gotten better and more affordable and more reliable. I see a lot more people using it, so it's curious that we have such an increase. I'm starting to suspect that e-bikes may have a role in this, but we'll have better information when we get some additional, when we're able to separate out the e-bikes from regular bikes in a future update of the ped bike crash analysis tool. Getting down to what can cyclists do? Well, the key thing is having lights at night, both headlight and taillight. A headlight is really necessary, not just by law, but by practicality. Reflectors only work if they are in front of the vehicle being shined on by the headlights. And in most crashes, the bicyclist is not in front of the vehicle until just a moment before impact. And then for a taillight, it's really important to have the taillight mounted to the bicycle rather than to your person or just something fabric, something that's where it's anchored on solidly, and so that it's parallel to the ground, and that way it maximizes the amount of light that gets to the driver's eyes. And that concludes my safety moment for this month. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Okay. So the next is agency report. This is an opportunity for partner agencies to speak during this to this committee. If any partners want to speak here, please let Rachel or Slade know. Next is FDOT with Jonathan Scarf.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, TAC members. I have a couple of events I'd like to bring to your attention in the month of March. First being our public meetings, we have 2. The resurfacing and pavement restoration of Sand Lake Road from Orange Blossom Trail to Orange Avenue, and that will take place on Thursday, March 6th. The time is from 5:30 to 7. And then be at the Art of Random Kindness, 2352 West Oak Ridge Road in Orlando, Florida. The next public meeting we have is the resurfacing of State Road 530 from west of South State Road 429 to Reedy Creek Bridge. And that project will also include upgrades to pedestrian curb ramps in accordance with current ADA standards. And that will be Wednesday, March 12th, 2025, from 5:30 to 7. Location, Orange Lake Golf Resort, Wilson Palmer Room, and that's in Kissimmee, Florida. And the last event is in Seminole County. There will be a ribbon cutting ceremony in downtown Oviedo on March 6th at 9:30, and that'll be for State Road 426, County Road 419. That project is reaching conclusion. They're completing final striping and signalization at this time. And that location is a grassy clearing, southeast corner of 426 and Oviedo Boulevard. Please arrive by 9:30. And so with our workforce development, FDOT would like to invite you to Central Florida's inaugural transportation industry hiring event that takes place Wednesday, April 30th from 3 to 7. That's Osceola Heritage Park. And I have the flyer information I can share with the committee if desired following this meeting. And in closing, I'd like to bring your attention to the FDOT Central Florida Safety Summit, our second annual event. That'll take place on May 9th, Friday, May 9th, from 10 to 2, and the location is the International Speedway. You can reach out to myself or Lorene Bobo if you have interest in participating in that. And pending questions, that concludes my.
And yeah, if you could get that flyer to us, we can distribute it to everyone.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Any questions? All right, thank you. Next is roll call. I'll turn it over to Ms. Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask members to please leave their microphone off until called and then remember to mute again. Barden.
Here.
Brock.
Here.
Cash.
Here.
Castellero. Castro.
Here.
Cologne.
Here.
Cornelison.
Here.
Coulon.
Present.
Crandell.
Here.
Ide. Elliott Moore.
Here.
Falk.
Present.
Gomez. Hardwick.
Present.
Hassan.
Present.
Kehoe. Krug. Lim.
Here.
Lopez.
Here.
Mendenhall. Nelson. Witten for O'Keefe.
Here.
Price.
Present.
Pullum.
Here.
Moffett for Ramos.
Here.
Recchi.
Here.
Roll.
Present.
Sanders.
Here.
Senerans. Smith.
Present.
Story.
Here.
Torres.
Present.
Wharton.
Here.
Martello for Williams.
Here.
Yeargain.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the roll call. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. Moving on to TAC and TISMO common presentation. We have 4 common presentations today. These presentations are intended for combined membership of TAC and TISMO. Members with questions can stand their nameplate at the end, and please remember to turn on your mic. The first presentation is from Mr. Alex Trauger with Metroplan Orlando, presenting MPO planning process for 2025.
Yes, good morning, everyone. This presentation intended to be short, but one that happens really this time of year, just kind of laying out what's going to be on the agendas, over the next 10 months with us here at Metroplan Orlando. As you know, we do have 3 core planning products. 2 of those 3 are updated annually, representing the tentative work program and the changes associated with that. Those of you who have been with us for some time know that we update our long-range plan and our metropolitan transportation plan, which you hear from Taylor about at every meeting. But that document's updated only every 5 years. It's a living document, so we're always amending it. But that major update only happens every 5 years. So this is that 5th year. Our board last and our technical advisor committee last approved the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the 2045 version of that in December of 2020. So again, this is that 5th year where you will be taking action on major updates to all of our core products. So what does that look like moving forward this year? We only get eight opportunities with our board and advisory committees every year. So we're at that second meeting of the year. You're hearing a lot of status updates that you'll see later in the agenda. You hear more of those at your upcoming meeting. But as we get into the summer season, as we do every year, you'll receive a draft of our prioritized project list, as well as our transportation improvement program. Those documents are representative of what you saw, likely what you saw in the draft tentative work program presentation that DOT gave to you last month. So shouldn't be too many surprises there unless something comes out of the legislative session. But that will blend into our current annual updates, adding that new 5th year. As we move into the fall, into the end of the year, you're going to be hearing a lot more or have tangible products and draft previews of our long range plan, our 2050 plan. So Taylor's going to be talking more about that. But again, wanting to put this on the radar, because this is one of those years where, in addition to the kind of annual TIPA or kind of monthly TIP amendments that you might see over the course of the year, we are going to be taking action and asking for a little bit more of your time in the review and participation process this year, more than typical. So again, as we move forward, Slade and Jason from my team are going to be reaching out over the next couple of weeks to you guys and starting some of those preparations, especially as it relates to kind of updating the local section of our transportation improvement program. So stay tuned for that. But again, you'll be taking action on both the prioritized project list and the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, at your May meeting. Board will take action in June. Again, long range plan. Taylor's going to talk about that, and you'll hear about that a lot through the year. Be taking action on that at your December meeting. All of our advisory committees meet this year in December. So with that, this is kind of the path moving forward. We're kind of in a stabilization approach with our 2 documents, knowing that by the end of the year, we'll have likely some new direction, especially as it relates to funding policy and cost feasible projects, and we'll calibrate our near-term lists next year after that long-range plan is adopted and approved. So with that, again, this is really more to kind of put it on your radar, what to expect when you're with us over the next 6 meetings. But again, I'll answer any questions, but Taylor is going to be up next talking about the long-range plan. So if you have any MTP-specific questions, please yield those to the next presentation. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's all I have this morning.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? All right, thank you. Ms. Taylor Laurent with Metroplan Orlando, like Mr. Alex Trauger said, will present on the 2050 MTP status update.
All right, good morning, everyone. So with the status updates that you normally get every single one of your meetings that you hear from me, we're going to be switching the focus of some of these updates to go from the breadth of work that we're completing to focusing more on depth to be able to get feedback directly from you to help us iterate through our funding scenario process this calendar year. So as we move forward, you will be receiving information about all of the ongoing activities within the 2050 MTP updates as part of your agenda packets. That includes all the technical documentation as well as our public engagement reports. Those will all continue to be in your agenda packets. For our TISMO members, that's in your agenda packet under tab 2. For our TAC members, that's in your agenda packet under tab 1. So with that, as we discussed at your last meeting back in January, we're at an inflection point with the 2050 plans development and are on the precipice of developing our funding scenarios. To set the stage for the development of these scenarios, there are 4 key items that we need. The first being the needs assessment, so the transportation needs within our region and projects identified to be able to address those needs. You'll normally hear me refer to that as our transportation to-do list. Then we need to apply our prioritization methodology, which we developed collaboratively late last year. And that needs to be applied to our transportation to-do list so we know the order in which we would like to address those projects. The third item that we need is the revenue forecasts or the budgetary control totals to let us know how many of those projects we can fund over the next 25 years. Then the last element that we're going to be focusing on today is the funding policy, which is our guide to how we spend the limited funding available within our region programmatically. So the funding scenarios, the purpose of them is to evaluate how changes in funding allocations change the types and number of projects that are funded within our 3-county area. As we develop the different scenarios, we will be developing and reviewing tangible comparisons between them so we can understand what are the true implications of choosing one scenario versus another. How many numbers of projects are being included, what types of projects, how many miles of improvements, elements like that. And as we review these together and iterate upon the different funding scenarios through this calendar year, we're going to be working to build consensus on a single preferred funding scenario, which will be used to develop the MTP cost feasible plan this year. But of all of the scenarios, they do need to accomplish a minimum of 3 things. The first is that they need to support the 2050 MTP goals, which we developed collaboratively last year. They need to help us achieve our regional performance measures, which you took action on at your last meeting following Laura and Alex's presentations. And then they also need to provide us with flexibility to be able to adapt over time as both technology and trends continue to evolve and grow. As we all know, all of our transportation projects are funded from a myriad of funding sources, from federal, state, local to toll revenues. But as we develop the 2050 funding scenarios, we're going to be focusing on a portion of the federal funding category, and that is for urban attributable TMA funds, or you'll likely hear me refer to them as MPO funds in shorthand. And those are the funds for which we have programming authority. The current funding policy is the recommended funding scenario from the 2045 MTP. It only includes those MPO funds that I just mentioned and does not include any state, local, or toll funding. So the funding from that particular policy is divided across 4 different modal categories, focusing on complete streets, transit, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, as well as artisanal and technology improvements. And each of those 4 categories has its own specific percentage of funding allocated to each of those modes. So why are we going to be spending the majority of 2025 and our time together focusing on this funding policy? Why is this so important? Well, the funding policy provides us with the structure to be able to move forward with our prioritization approach development, which we've worked on collaboratively together, but also the annual programming of projects into both our TIP and the work program each year. The current approach from the 2045 plan allows us to be able to program a greater number of projects because there is currently a funding maximum of $4 million per project phase upon initial programming that's been implemented. And out of an annual budget of about $40 million per year, that's approximately 10 project phases being funded on average per year. The current policy also allows for a wider variety of projects to be funded, in that we have 4 modal programs, each with their own dedicated source of funding. And we're able to see a variety of different types of improvements being funded based on the structure of the prior policy. This policy also allows us to be able to have projects flow seamlessly through the planning process and maintain planning consistency as they move from the long-range plan to our prioritized project list, and are ultimately programmed into the Transportation Improvement Program and the FDOT 5-year work program each year. So that funding policy provides the structure through which we organize all of our long-range plan needs lists in both the MTP and the PPL, and how we've structured our TIP to be able to allow everyone to find those projects from their initial concept and inception to construction and implementation later on. So as we look to 2050, we're going to be asking some very poignant questions. What are the elements that we need to include in this modal policy or in this funding policy? And how do we revise it to be able to achieve our region's goals? The first question, what modal categories should we include in the policy? Should there be fewer than we've had in the past, or should there be more? Should we change the percentage of allocations to each of the modal categories within our policy? So while these are very poignant questions, very pointed and detailed, we have been asking the public for their thoughts on these particular items throughout the development of the 2050 MTP to give us a starting point for our conversations this year. So since the start of the 2050 plans development last January 2024, feels like yesterday, but also a year ago at the same time, we've received over 380 responses through both online and in-person engagement, and that's what will be reflected on this slide today. I was notified on Wednesday we've now received 430 responses, so this will be updated in the near future. But of the 5 modal categories that we pro-offered as part of the survey, all of them were seen as relevant and a desire to have them considered within the funding policy for our 2050 plan. That included complete streets, active transportation, TISMO, transit capital, as well as safety. And then we also asked them, how would they slice the pie? How much funding would they allocate to each of those different modal programs? So of the same 5 options that were pro-offered, the most funding dedicated by the public was to transit capital as well as safety at 30% and 21% respectively, followed by complete streets, active transportation, TISMO, and then our other category, which does have a lot of cross-pollination with the 5 pro-offered categories. So of the key themes, as we reviewed the detailed survey results from the public, we were really seeing a strong emphasis on multimodal travel options, as well as the public seeing all of the modal categories that we discussed as equally important, but desiring to see a stronger dedicated funding source for safety as well as transit projects. We have asked you, our technical partners, and those who participate in our technical workshop series, these same questions. And we've received consistent feedback, which is good to see as we start to develop these funding scenarios. We saw a similar focus on multimodal travel and an emphasis for the need for dedicated funding for safety within our region. Now, during our technical workshop here in February, just a few weeks ago, we had a more detailed survey for our technical partners. So thank you everyone for your engagement in that particular discussion. Today, we're going to be talking through what those questions were, the results and the feedback that we received, and then our proposed actions with how we'll move forward to develop the funding scenarios. So to start us off, the very first 2 questions were really focused on the modal categories, which we were just discussing with the public feedback. Our first question was if MPO funding should be used to support local government goes with requests for safety improvements on resurfacing projects through FDOT's resurfacing program. And that would be if and when those safety elements would have otherwise not been able to be included in the project scope of work. So based on the feedback that we received at that technical workshop, there was 83% of our respondents supporting this. Then our second question was a validation question. Was there still support to be able to set aside federal MPO funding to be able to support safety improvements both on the state highway system and off the state highway system? This was also positively supported at 76% based on all of our participants that day. So with these positive responses, we do plan on incorporating both of these categories into the first set of funding scenarios that will be developed. Our third question resulted in a bit of a mixed bag of responses. Should the 2050 funding policy allow for MPO funding to support widening projects? As you can see, we were kind of at a 50-50 split in terms of this conversation. Opinions were split evenly across all of the agencies that were participating, with both yeses and nos spread evenly amongst each of our 3 counties and our participating cities and towns. And even within individual agencies, one department would say yes, the other would say no. So this has been quite the polarizing topic. So we dove deep into those survey results, and the only common theme that we were able to notice was that traffic engineers were more likely to say yes to allow these funds for widening compared to all other respondents. I hold the PE license too, I hear it. So based on this near even split and kind of doing that deep dive of all of the results, our initial path forward as we develop our funding scenarios will be to maintain the existing policy, which was established more than 15 years ago, to not use MPO or TMA funding for widening projects. As we evaluate the 2050 plan funding scenarios, and those first few are developed a little bit later this year, we can revisit that topic as needed, but that's where we plan to start. Our fourth question was a bit more clear in terms of responses. There was unanimous support from all of our participants to increase the federal MPO funding maximum for project programming. So I mentioned earlier that that limit is currently set at a maximum of $4 million per project phase. And with all of the rising costs that we've experienced in our industry, we know that that $4 million does not go as far as it used to. So our next natural question was, what should that new limit be? And that's where the uncertainty returned. There were a lot of questions about how to establish this new limit as projects vary significantly in both scope and scale across our 3-county area. So after discussing this uncertainty and a myriad of options that could be pursued, the group settled on a desire to keep the limit at $4 million as a base for initial programming and to increase that base limit for inflation based upon the year in which that project is anticipated to begin. So that $4 million base plus inflation strategy is something that we've already applied when we're programming projects from our prioritized project list into the Transportation Improvement Program and the FDOT Work Program. So that's something that we'll be able to clearly incorporate into the 2050 MTP funding strategies that funding scenarios that you'll see this year. And moving into our last question, resulted in a surprisingly even set of responses again. This question was, should a 2050 the MTP funding policy include a local agency match requirement to be able to leverage the MPO funding for projects? So the actual survey responses, the no's were very clear. No, that was not a desired requirement. The yeses all came with an asterisk. And that asterisk really focused on the uncertainty about how to successfully implement something like that across our 3-county region and how to do that in practice. So with these results in mind and kind of knowing where we were talking about things and knowing that historically a local agency funding match has not been a requirement to receive MPO funding for at least the past 15 years, we are proposing to not include a local agency match requirement as part of the 2050 funding plan scenarios. So after we hammered out all of those details together about how to develop these funding scenarios, these are the resulting funding scenario categories, or those modal categories that will be considered as part of the first set of funding scenarios for you to evaluate this year. This will include a safety category with that set aside for safety improvements on resurfacing projects, then complete streets, active transportation, transit capital, as well as our TISMO and technology category. So now that we've thoroughly discussed how we're going to curate these funding scenarios, now let's talk about when you're going to be able to see them. So this is your potentially 4th reminder this morning. On April 9th, we're going to have a MPO Board and Committee Summit focusing on the 2050 MTP. And at that summit, we're going to be evaluating and discussing the initial first draft of the funding scenario results, being able to compare those tangible items and reports about what each scenario looks like and what the implications of choosing one versus another is. And we're going to be doing a few activities to be able to get your feedback and recommendations to help refine these funding scenarios to create that next iteration. So as we move into April and May of this year in your committee meetings during those few months, we'll be reviewing that feedback from both the summit and the April technical workshop series and continuing our discussions and iterating through those funding scenarios. As we move into June and July of this year, we're going to be incorporating some additional feedback from the June technical workshops that will happen around that time as well. And that's where we're going to switch from continuing those discussions to working towards building consensus on a single recommended funding scenario. That recommended scenario is what we will come back to you with in August and September for you to preview as the draft 2050 MTP cost feasible plan. And this is the critical path that allows us to be able to work towards completing the 2050 MTP and adopting it by December of this year. So thank you very much for your time this morning. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, thank you for that. Can you refresh my memory and let me know how a project's category would be determined, especially if there's a lot of overlap? For instance, if we're making a protected bike lane, that's a safety project, but it also could be considered an active transportation. Throw in a transit boarding island and you've got 3 potential project categories there.
Keeps it very fun for sure. So as we were developing the needs assessment with all of you and our local agencies throughout the region, we were developing detailed project descriptions for each of these projects. So we could understand the scope and a little bit of the scale at this 25+ year look ahead for our transportation to-do list. Based on those project descriptions And the definitions that we've had for each of these modal programs, modal categories, we're able to assign those to be able to fit effectively within each of them. Specifically for safety projects, that category is only eligible for projects that were identified in a Vision Zero safety action plan, whether that was the regional one, the county level plans, or the local plans. We'll make sure to have those clear definitions as part of the scenario comparison reports, so we all understand what we're looking at.
This is, I guess, more of a comment or suggestion. So with the limits by phase, something to think about. In our experience, we have found it is much more efficient for us to, when we can, locally fund design. So, but by establishing the limits and not, so basically what I'm getting at is if you could make sort of an exception or a caveat that can be considered when you're deciding how much to program in construction. So if we spent $1 million locally on design, which hypothetically saved $1 million for that phase in federal funding, then perhaps the construction could be programmed so that the pool of money is the same, but the order, but who's funding which phase, you know what I'm saying? So just something to keep in mind, because it is often really inefficient to design a project with federal funds if you can locally fund it instead.
I understand the schedule concerns there. That's something that if a local agency does go ahead and choose to fund a planning, design, or some earlier phase of a project, right of way, whatever that may be, that does not change the ranking of the project on the prioritization process. So if you're saying that the design is completed now and hopefully construction can be advanced to fit within the next 5 years, that's not something we have historically done. And I don't anticipate seeing that change as we move forward. But as we reach out to you, if and when your project is at the top of that list and we're saying it's time to do the intake form, which heads up, in the next 2 months, you'll be hearing from me about that. When we're saying it's time to program your project, we think we're going to be programming design. That's when you can tell us you're planning to do design and we should really be talking about programming construction. So we're talking about that for each project as it comes up naturally.
Yeah, so my point is, if there's a way to factor in that hypothetically that construction could be, the limit could be raised because we're funding design. Not that we're accelerating the project, but it's just more efficient.
Mr. Chairman, I believe we did consider construction-ready projects ahead of the algorithm-based approach that we have now. Back in the days of sword fighting, we definitely, if there was a construction-ready project, then it would move forward. So I would encourage MetroPlan team to consider that as because the most important thing is getting this stuff in the ground. And if that can happen with investments from the local agencies, I think it merits a move forward in constructions.
Right now, what you will see, or what you will see when the funding scenarios are developed, the prioritization process gives us a really strong way to be able to look at projects that are brand new to the list. But projects that we have started and have phases currently programmed in the TIP, but maybe not completed through construction, those are still going to remain towards the top of the list. So we complete the projects that we've started first before we bring in anything new. I'll make that note about potential other changes.
I want to make sure I understand kind of Mr. Brock's question and also what we said here. With the $4 million max, are you saying that's $4 million max per phase? Okay, so a project could get 4 million in planning, design, construction. That's $12 million.
Hypothetically, is that
yeah.
correct? Not that it would necessarily, is that correct? That it's per phase, so hypothetically.
Yes, hypothetically, maximum of $4 million per phase.
So my point was, well, suppose it's a $5 million construction project. It doesn't seem really fair that because the local government decided to fund all those other phases, that local government also still
still
has to
not.
add an extra $1 million to make it constructible. That's my point.
Okay, I didn't understand.
Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Well, so thank you for providing the overview. While not, one thing I noticed and happy to see it is that we have a lot of projects under the Complete Streets, umbrella. And one thing that I just would like to encourage Metro Plan to make sure that staying active with is, so I know that the Complete Streets page was removed from the FHWA site, and I just want to make sure that there continues to be tools out there to help local governments and folks really understand how to best implement. So just encouraging to, however we can keep those tools and everything available, because we do have such a large component of Complete Streets projects in the MTP. Yeah, just couldn't find anywhere else to mention it on the agenda, so I figured, hey, why not?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next presentation is with Mr. Slade Downs from Metroplan Orlando to present the updates to the Tracking the Trends program.
All right, thank you. Good morning again. Like Mr. Chair said, I'm here to tell you a bit about our updates to the Tracking the Trends program. This is kind of just a quick teaser of what has been updated. I'd like to encourage all of you to go onto the site and explore it for yourselves. But with that, I can tell you a bit about it. Tracking the Trends is a program that is designed to track historic data in transportation and identify trends over time throughout our region. Like other MPOs, the metrics we choose to track are aligned with federal performance measures, but we also go further than the federally required performance metrics to track just about every quality of life data point that touches transportation. The full Tracking the Trends program includes an area profile and transportation highlights, the data library, the accessibility hub, and the system performance dashboard. And you can take a look at all of those at metroplanorlando.gov/maps-tools. So I'll walk you through some quick highlights of each of those sections now. First up is our area profile and transportation highlights. The area profile shows an overview of various characteristics of the region as they are now. Includes some interactive maps and selected indicators. The transportation highlights section is kind of a 5-minute quick shallow dive of some of those metrics and indicators to kind of give you a really quick, accessible view of certain aspects of the transportation network in the region. A couple of examples, like the one up on the screen here, you can see how growth has changed over the course of from 2000 to present day. It's actually a slider, so you can move around to see your city or your neighborhood and move back and forth to see, just how much growth has happened in that time. Some other takeaways in the past year, our fatalities, serious injuries, and non-motorized crashes have fallen. Also, our daily vehicle miles traveled have returned to pre-COVID levels. This is just some of the quick information that you can get from the transportation highlights section. So moving on to our data library, whereas the previous item was kind of more of a shallow dive, this is where you can really get into more of the granular data. It's basically our data clearinghouse with over 150 transportation metrics. It is intended for your use as our transportation partners, but of course it's accessible to the public as well. And we hope that it will save you a little bit of time. You can go and download the spreadsheets and the data directly from the site rather than emailing us and waiting for a response. You can just get the data immediately. And that again is available at that same site listed on the screen. So next we have our system performance dashboard. So this interactive dashboard is a one-stop shop for all federally mandated performance measures. Alex Trauger and Laura Bauk spoke about target setting for those performance measures at our last meeting. And this dashboard is kind of the public-facing component of how we track those targets and measures. It features some interactive maps, not just, you know, tables. It's got the maps as well, like you can see up on the screen. That's pavement conditions for East Orange and East Seminole counties. Of course, you can view those maps for all of the federal performance measures at that site. And lastly, we have our accessibility hub. Accessibility, of course, being how we determine how easy it is to reach destinations of interest. For example, a neighborhood with lots of parks, restaurants, and other services would be considered highly accessible, but maybe a gated community with only one entrance and exit would be not very accessible. So this hub is a good place to kind of see different points of interest like food, transit, schools, etc. How accessible each part of the region is to all of those points of interest. And each one of those has an interactive map and an accessibility score based on, you know, the overall accessibility of, say, access to food, but also an accessibility score to all points of interest listed there. And so here up on the screen, we've got accessibility to parks. Down near Kissimmee, you can see public and private parks. Like, say you were looking to, you know, buy a new home or something. This could be useful for, you know, seeing where the nearest playground was. But there's also a component where you can identify gaps in that same accessibility. So this is that same area and maybe where it would be a little longer walk or maybe even a drive to get to some of those services. So with that, that is the quick shallow dive on the Tracking the Trends program. Again, I encourage you to check out the full site at metroplanorlando.gov/maps-tools. Thanks. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Anybody have any questions?
Slade, for the accessibility hub, was it just taking into account land uses, or were you also looking at if there were sidewalks or bike lanes, or how was that connection also looked at, or was that not?
So as far as the actual accessibility on the map itself, I don't believe that takes into account like pedestrian or cyclist facilities. It's just distance based on the network itself. But some of our other plans, you know, take that into account.
Thank you. Yeah, I brought that up because I wasn't sure if it was pulling from the open road maps. I don't know. A lot of the GIS databases are pulling from that, and my review, I've seen there's a lot of inaccuracies that we're trying to update, but it's probably across the 3-county region that'll show where there's no sidewalks, where there are sidewalks. So it's pulling down everyone's walkability score, but it's not giving you the real score because it just hasn't been updated.
All of these accessibility analyses are using like Esri network editor. So we are kind of getting to the, as the person walks, rides, drives, kind of, so there is that aspect. If absent sidewalk, then pedestrian, you know, accessibility is decreased. We spend a fair amount of time working with a couple of our consultants to maintain it's part of our evaluation network for prioritization purposes, but looking at a higher resolution kind of RCI network. So we're constantly updating that and publishing that on our website, kind of understanding where sidewalk gaps are. We know y'all are filling them all the time. So, that needs to be represented in the analysis to make sure that the outputs, show for that.
Thanks. Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And our last presentation for today is with Mr. Eric Hill from Metroplan Orlando to give us an update on the electric vehicle readiness study.
Good morning again, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. This is a wrap up on our study. I've been updating you on this work as we've completed it. And we will have the report on our website in March, along with some fact sheets. So we wanted this to be a resource for our stakeholders, but also to help our partners as we move into this next era of personal transportation, specifically cars. So we've done an assessment. We held some specific workshops on different topics. We wanted to add this as a feature to this study, different than the way we normally do studies. And then we looked at the infrastructure throughout the region, and then the public outreach effort that we had started to do, but it was combined with work that our communications team was doing. And then the next steps, what will be this evolution? Up until more recently, I thought everybody around the dais would be driving an EV at some point in their future. Not a golf cart, but an actual car. But I'm not so sure. So the assessment. So we have different categories of electric vehicles. Battery electric vehicles that you can charge, plug-in vehicles that can be charged, and then hybrid vehicles that you cannot charge. They use their braking systems to charge themselves. And then fuel electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles. Our work focused on the top three, not all four. And this kind of, for me, it was an education because I can recall as a young man, I learned that you can call a malt a beer, but not a beer a malt. And so not all electric vehicles are made the same. The infrastructure, pretty much like as we fuel up our vehicles now, internal combustion engines, you can do public charging or you can do charging at home. Now, there's different levels of charging. There's level 1, which is very slow, kind of like phasing out as we move into level 2, which is a lot faster. But then level 3 is supercharged, where you can charge up very fast, almost as fast as when you fuel up at the gas pump. So the assessment, we looked at the planning context, regional context, and infrastructure. Planning, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, NEVI program, that's geared towards the state and the state deploying charging facilities along interstate limited access roadways. Local governments, most of your planning efforts are in your comp plans. In terms of the regional context, land use, travel patterns, and existing ownership all influence how you would like to charge or able to charge your vehicle. If you, in residential areas, you can charge at home in single family homes. But then you have office, retail, and then tourist areas that all require or would probably have different levels of charging. Travel patterns, if you're a commuter, again, you can probably charge at home. If you do not own a single family home, chances are you can charge at a public spot or at an office building. In our garage, we do have chargers now, and many garages have those, and many gas stations have charging facilities. Existing ownership. Again, if you own a home, you can charge at home. If not, you're going to have to rely on a public charging facility. In terms of the infrastructure, we've looked at existing charging equipment across the region. Some of this was complemented with information we learned from some of our Tesla owners, that many of the Tesla facilities, we did not initially include, but we did adopt those into the readiness study. Disadvantaged communities, this was a concern that we had because in many disadvantaged communities, number one, there's low ownership. Number two, there are most of these communities are multi-housing unit communities or multi-unit communities. And having a charging facility within the residence is a challenge because if you only have one, how do you limit or have someone that has their vehicle there being charged, come back and get their vehicle, move it so someone else can charge. You know, I look at, well, I'm a father and I can tell you when my adult children were children and we had them in daycare, if they stayed longer than they needed to, I got penalized. So something along that. Mr. Chairman, you're smiling because you have a small child that will at some point get to that. So that kind of idea can be in place. EV policies, many of the jurisdictions, and we've looked at most of them, have codes or regulations on how to establish charging facilities and how to maintain those. And Florida Senate Bill 1084. You know, there's state legislation that comes out that I'm for, and then a lot that I'm against. This is one that I kind of support because this advocates for a similar system across the state. Everyone to be consistent in terms of how charging facilities are put in place, how they're maintained, where they're located. So it actually usurps your local charging codes and regulations. This is a projection on what we anticipated the region would look like. Right now, less than or about 1% of the vehicles in our region are electric vehicles. But that mustard colored graph or portion of the graph was the projection. Again, up until more recently, I thought it would be real, but I don't think it's still as valid as it was when we first did this because of the changes at the federal level. A lot of the ownership of EV vehicles, EVs, were based on the incentives that the federal government was offering. Now that those are being pretty much done away with, not so sure that we'll continue this this type of ownership. So the workshops. So we had a utility workshop where we had Florida Power, OUC, KUC, and Duke Energy participate. And just these are just some of the highlights from the discussions we had with them. There's a need for consistency in permitting. They would like to have more control of EV networks. Now you can have a company or private entity that owns one location or a network of locations, but they would like to have some more control so that they can determine rates. There's a lack of communication with the states on the NEVI program. And when we held their workshop, they expressed interest from Metro Plan Orlando to take the lead on going after it's the charging fueling infrastructure grant that was available. And at the time, we weren't sure exactly what we were going to ask for. So we kind of let that window close because we were early in this work and we didn't know what we wanted. The policy workshop, everyone here was invited to this one. Again, most of your comprehensive plans speak to policy issues on charging facilities. Again, some of the challenges, parking, maintenance and operations. A lot of the information that I have read indicates that many of these facilities, when you go to them, or if you're an electric vehicle owner and you go to charge, some of them don't work. It don't work properly. So that was one of the concerns. So maintaining these facilities is important. And then there's a trade-off. Again, level one is kind of phasing out, but when you look at level two or the cost operations of level two versus direct charge, fast charge is significant. And as jurisdictions, if you want to bring those into your community, understanding the requirements between those two. In terms of the infrastructure, data sharing and partnerships with utilities and charging providers is important. understanding anticipated land use, where these could be located in the future, and then just integrating the latest data. I mentioned that one of the Tesla owners that participated in our charging in this particular workshop, he highlighted that many of the Tesla locations we had initially started with, we had missed. In terms of investment, this was, I thought this was one of the better ones because there's been a lot of resources targeted at moving to EVs. But that's probably going to, it could last, I'm not sure. But it's going to change. In terms of the role of ownership of EVs. As jurisdictions, do you want to be the owners or do you want to partner and lease locations to private entity? But again, determining your role will determine how well you are providing this as a service to your residents. And again, it's the typical project budgeting. There's the capital investment, and then there's just maintenance and operations. So in terms of the infrastructure, the map on the left are level 2 locations that we've identified with the half-mile buffer around them. We estimate that's like a 15-minute walk because if you leave your car to be charged, you may go do something else and then come back. But then on the right, we have those gaps where we identified multi-housing units. These are areas that we see could benefit from having these facilities in place. But we wanted to do that again to address the equity issue and understanding the impacts there. This is a charging tool that our consultant, Kittleson's, developed, and it's for your use in locating charging facilities, making sure that, of course, it has electricity or supply of electricity to it. Ownership, again, I just mentioned that. Who do you want to own it and operate it? Resilience, that it's going to stand up to, conditions, not only weather conditions, but, I mentioned that some of these don't work when you try and use them. Vandalism. Connectivity to the surrounding community or land use itself. Ensuring that it's in a multimodal location. So again, if someone wants to, in the picture here, leave their vehicle to charge and maybe take the sunrail, which is going by at this time. But making sure that there's that connection as well and making sure that the population around the facility is going to use it. So outreach, I mentioned, we initially wanted to have or do a survey. But at the same time, our communications team was doing a transportation survey, so we just borrowed information from their work. And we just, asked the question, how many people, again, are planning to own an electric vehicle? Most of the people that responded said yes. And again, when we started this work, I remember I always asking that question, how many people around here own an electric vehicle? And I think 1 or 2 hands went up. And each time I gave an update, I asked that question, and it didn't change. But based on the responses to the survey, it should change in the next 20 years. However, again, I'm not so sure we're going to reach that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just we were off on our estimate. So moving into the future, these are the metrics that we developed just to monitor the growth of EVs. Again, right now it's probably 1% of the vehicle ownership in our planning area, but we want to keep track of this as we move into the future. It could change, but we want to keep track of this and see where this goes. We do have these 3 fact sheets, one on electric vehicles 101, designing for EVs, and then the funding opportunities that exist. Right now, it's in English, but we want to convert it to Spanish so that it can be used by our community. So, Mr. Chairman, that wraps up my presentation, and I'll take any questions or comments.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question slash comment. So we are on the north side of downtown, right near the Robinson recharge station. And we also use the stations in our parking garages at the Centroplex meter eater. And we've gotten some pushback from guests who are coming or visitors who are coming to our offices with the only allowing the cars to be parked while they're charging. And I understand that there is a limit to the number of chargers in the downtown area. But we have found a concern for people to use those chargers because of the requirements that the cars be charging while in those spaces.
So is that is that a not understand, is that a question or just a comment? And if it's a
More of a
comment,
comment, just a concern because I mean, especially in the parking garage, while we only have 2 spaces in the garage, to have people park in the garage and then come a block over to the office and then go back and move their car halfway through the day or a couple hours later and then come back and continue the meeting. There needs to be some type of system in place to allow for more flexibility as these systems move forward.
some flexibility on the use of the parking spots with the chargers.
Exactly.
Well, I'll defer to, and you said City of Orlando?
Yeah, we are, but I mean, this
Okay.
is,
Okay,
we had a similar concern when we had a meeting down at Margaritaville.
right. Well, they are there for charging electric vehicles. And so I would imagine as someone who has an electric vehicle, if you want to charge a vehicle, but then someone who does not have one is parked there, that would be a concern that I would have. And I would imagine, again, it's pretty much like disabled parking. It's there for a certain reason. And unfortunately, maybe there's not enough parking for non-electric vehicles. However, I think that enforcement would need to be in place so that those parking spots aren't being taken by non-EV vehicles.
I'm sorry, I should have been more clear. The vehicles, they park there, they charge, but then once they are fully charged,
They
currently
stay.
they
Stay.
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, right. And that goes to my comment about, penalizing people. Needs to be some mechanism in place so that, if you're gonna leave your vehicle there, you're gonna get charged, you're gonna get penalized for that. And I would imagine it could go as far as, and again, I'm gonna defer to the jurisdictions on how they want to, implement any kind of code or regulation. But there's, the boot alternative, if you will. That's probably a little extreme. But again, you want to believe that there's gonna be some courtesy at play here, that as you are charging your vehicle, you leave it there and you go away, that you come back and you're able, you move your vehicle so someone else can charge. I'm not sure if I provided you with a sufficient response or not.
That was good, thank you.
Okay.
This is sort of a comment, I guess. It's along the same lines though. So it's just and you, I'm sure already know this, but actually that issue is probably like with the recharge lot, is that what it's called on Robinson? Are those all level 3 chargers?
Those are, I believe, level 2.
Okay, so if they're level 2, that's a different thing. But if you have a DC fast charger, it makes no sense for you to be expecting somebody to park there and then use Sunrail to go off to Winter Park, because no car that's worth its weight will need to be at a DC fast charger for more than an hour, even if you're going to 100%. So the flip side of that is a lot of the gas savings that people are obsessed with EVs. I think there are many more advantages to EVs. That pretty much gets wiped out with DC fast charging, because you might be paying 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 cents per kilowatt hour to DC fast charge, which makes it competitive, sometimes worse than gas prices. So I think my point is, and you kind of alluded to it in one of your slides, that especially for multifamily housing, I think we need more level 2 chargers that are, and that's where you would expect somebody to be parked for a long time. It's much more economical. You're back down to the 10 to 15 cents per kilowatt hour because you're paying what you would pay at your house. So it's the fast chargers are awesome, but they don't work in all contexts. So it's just, I don't have any solutions. It's just information that for people who might not be as familiar.
And just as a part of that is we all have vehicles, and what are they doing right now? They're just sitting, doing nothing. And so the level 2 charging infrastructure is probably the more feasible and reasonable spot for us to be. Fast charger, if you look at limited access roadways, the turnpike, where someone's traveling a long distance, they stop, fast charge, get back on the road.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment, my understanding with the, what we called parking fees. That's a business rule. I don't think it's regulated by anything, so it kind of depends on who is, operating and maintaining the, we'll say the level 3 charger in that instance, set up the business rules and how much they're gonna charge and, how long you can be there when you're not charging and that kind of thing. So I don't know that it's necessarily a policy thing that anybody would change. It's just based on the sort of the contract and the agreement set up with whoever is going to be, maintaining the and operating the equipment and the revenue that they're going to get and how they're going to structure that revenue. So.
Okay, and then to add to that, I agree 100%. A lot of it is their business case and whatnot. For the Robinson Hub, that's definitely geared towards the folks coming off the highway, recharging in quick order and then getting back on. Generally, this is a discussion that we've had internally at the city for chargers on street, is how do we, and it's a broader discussion on curb management in general. How do we make the best use of our curb, our limit, which is a limiting resource? We want to have prices so that you have good turnover of spots. We don't want somebody just sitting there all day charging when they might not still be charging. So that is something that we're looking at. And so I think each parking space has a different purpose. Is the main purpose to charge? Is it to be there all day? And I think there's room for both. The one thing that I will, just disagree a little bit is that we, at least at the city, we're not big fans of the Senate bill from last year because it removes a lot of I understand the need to have overarching consistency across the state, but it really removed the city's ability to enforce any EV parking regulations and really ceded that to the state. And while we understand the need for that in terms of kind of the infrastructure side of it, we would still have liked to have that ability to really require at least some basic minimum level of number of charging spaces and those types of things, which we no longer can. And so that's one challenge that we're still working through. How do we continue to incentivize the inclusion of charging? Because most of where people are going to charge is not on city property. It's going to be at the multifamily or at the businesses. So how do we kind of get all of that to happen? But I appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, and Jock, just so I'm clear and we're all clear, that location, is it fast charge or is it level 2? Okay, just want to be clear on that. And just to be clear also, that Senate bill is, again, that's just my own, and it's not speaking on behalf of the agency.
Any other questions? All right, thank you for the presentation. Moving on to public comments on the action items. I don't anticipate any public comments since there's only meeting minutes, but we'll still go through the process. So we will now hear public comments on the action items. We ask that you provide your name and address for the record, and please hold your comments to 2 minutes or less. If any members of the public wish to comment and are joining us virtually, please use the raise hand function and you'll be recognized, or dial *9 on your phone keypad. We will send you a prompt to unmute your mic. Do we have anyone joining us virtually who would like to make a comment?
There are no hands raised online.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any members of the public attending in person that wishes to make a
None
comment?
received, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Any written comments?
None received.
You. All right, moving on to action items. It is for the January 24th, 2025 meeting minutes. Could I get a motion?
Chad Smith, move to approve the meeting minutes.
Thank you. Anyone for a second?
Second. Nelson.
Okay. Any discussion? All right, this is a voice vote. If this is a voice vote, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, there are no TAC only presentations. So moving on to general information, there are several items in that tab, in tab 3 of your agenda packet. And the upcoming meeting of interest, the next TAC meeting is held in person on Friday, April 25th. And congratulations to Mr. Lenny Barden to be the next chair. And the next MetroPlan Orlando board meeting is held in person on Wednesday, March 12th. And the next up is member comments and other business. Does anyone have any comments? Yes.
Hi, I wanted to circle back to Mr. Brock's comment on the funding scenarios. I've been noodling over it during the meeting, and I think that it's related to one of my concerns is it takes projects very long to move through the TMA fund process if you're funding the whole project through that. And it also doesn't have as much flexibility in being sort of nimble when certain funding opportunities pop up at the discretionary level or through local funds. And so I guess I'd just like to ask if there's a possibility as we consider the funding scenarios over the next year to look at a project cap rather than a phase cap, so that you can maybe have that cumulative, if you want to put 8 million into construction versus 4 in planning and 4 in construction.
Quickly respond. Something we can certainly consider. We'll work through that. Only consideration, we receive $40 million a year. We start slicing that up, projects fail, projects grow as they go. And from our experience, if there's not the federal funds there, 8 times out of 10, the project defers, deletes. So that's where the intent was to try to keep the projects small. So in the event they grow and evolve, as we all know they do, that they're still accomplishable. We've seen a lot of segmenting of projects over the past 2 years. Projects that came on our books at 4 million are now 50. Design's not done. I won't point fingers today, but I think we all can reflect about, how we need to advance. So some of our intent, in being cautious moving forward on the size of projects is knowing that each of your projects will have to go through a local agency program administered by DOT. There's a lot of rules to follow as it relates to that. So we're not opposed to the, looking at the funding caps, but just trying to keep in mind kind of the project delivery aspect of that. And as it relates to bringing local funds to expedite projects, we're supportive of that. But where we have seen issues of that is when the money's not there, and as you know, design plans have a shelf life. And our concern is as things defer, as things change, you're doing work that is potentially wasted, will have to be redone. And we've seen that take place as well. So some of our cautionary notes are based on seeing the hundreds of projects that are going through on any given day. But I think as we're moving forward and we see those high priority projects, we want to see them across the finish line. So I think we can look towards alternatives, But I think as we're kind of looking, there's the long range planning process and then there's the annually, we're trying to, make it work. And like I said, very few of our local jurisdictions have the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal. I know Seminole County is in a different situation now with the sales tax, right? But not all of our jurisdictions have that same financial wherewithal to bring cash to table as it relates to that. So as we're trying to level the playing field to some degree as well, following our prioritization process, in some cases, some of our partners will have to pay for design, let the design be federalized because that's the only way the project will advance through the process. And the concern with over prioritizing projects that have a lot of local funding on them is then the basically the funds that are available kind of continue to get pushed back. So we're kind of in that game. But again, we're going to take this feedback. That's kind of part of those next steps, the tangibles. What does that mean if we blend it, and we'll see the outcome of that tangibly. So everything's on the table, but I think I just want to kind of go into that with the intent of this is to implement the projects. Years ago, we were allowed to make plans and then kind of a lot of wiggle room. The planning consistency requirements, the fiscal constraint requirements, both federal and state statutory, really require our process to be somewhat rigid. So I think this is where, as we're advancing projects, picking those top priority ones, which, we've had this discussion with many of you, which ones do we want to federalize? It doesn't make sense for every project to be federalized. It is in many cases more expensive. It is in many cases longer to deliver. NEPA's in flux right now, but we'll see how that plays out. But, there is an environmental checklist that you have to go through. There's overhead as an agency to enter into the LAP process. We acknowledge there's a cost of doing business. So let's kind of there's a lot of factors, there's a lot of considerations that we need to keep in mind. So again, over the next couple of months, that's why we're going to be spending this year working through that, iterating through that, so we can kind of see what's most important and how we need to strategize to get that stuff done. But my concern is it negatively impacting smaller jurisdictions that don't have that same financial wherewithal. And even some of our larger jurisdictions, I don't want to point fingers, some of our larger cities, 50, 60,000. What's your transportation budget every year? After you pay for streetlights, after you grind sidewalks and fix potholes. Absent a sales tax, of course, that is a different situation, but that's what we're keeping in mind. But your comments, both Brian's, Laura's and Kelly's, those are things that we're going to iterate through over the next couple of months, but just kind of wanted to, as we're all thinking and strategizing it, it's implementation minded and I'll leave it there.
Yeah,
So-
could it be possible to follow on that, Mr. Chairman? Yeah, if I may. Alex, thank you so much. As we are looking at the limited federal funding that we have and the strategy, also we just passed our Vision Zero, which we identified the high injury network corridors. And what I was thinking is when you have a TISMO project, you concentrate your improvements at the intersections because that's where they are signalized. So you are talking about the project, but the improvements are localized, that you can go ahead and take care of those. So that's why I believe that the TISMO projects, they have been successful. What about if we were to consider combining some sort of a TISMO project, but also with a safety improvement? Because maybe at those intersections, we can have some ADAs. Maybe you can do the extension of the turning movements, adding additional capacity. Intersection lighting is also something that the DOT did, which is normal cost or minimal cost, and it brings a lot of return on the investment. Is there a way also, as opposed to having a corridor project, that we can have TISMO plus safety at intersections and maybe some access management, and maybe we can get more return on the investment?
I'm going to look to Taylor because I try not to, make things too complicated. I'll let her respond to that.
All right, so in terms of the needs assessment, when we were developing this together, starting in summer of last year through end of last year, we were looking at individual modal needs assessments, looking at TISMO by itself, looking at active transportation by itself, et cetera, through all of our modal programs. When we came back to you last fall, we said, here's the full list, the full gambit. What are the opportunities to combine these projects? So they are those multimodal scopes to be able to address all of the needs that were identified at the same location, but still keep that project within that $4 million-ish amount. I'm going to use ish. We're talking about inflation as well. So the project is approachable and implementable regardless of the agency. So a lot of that's already been taken into account through the needs assessment process for the long range planning purposes. As we move forward, let's say Project A, Main Street, pick your favorite limits, comes forward and it's ready to intake from the top of the project priority list to the tip. That's when we reach out to you and ask about the specific scope for that project. That's another opportunity to refine that scope, going from that high level description that we developed anywhere from last year to 5 years ago, depending on when we're having that conversation, to make sure that it's right for the day that we're actually programming it. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for flexibility following the adoption of the 2050 MTP process, but this gives us our starting point to know what our vision is and about how we're going to get there.
Any other comments, business?
I one more bit of housekeeping. So as we mentioned earlier, we're getting a new chair at our next meeting. So traditionally, kind of the way TAC leadership has gone is rotated amongst the 3 counties. So Hong being from Winter Park is Orange, Lenny being from Altamont, it's Seminole. And so traditionally, the next vice chair would be from either Osceola or one of our kind of interjurisdictional agencies like Lynx or CFX or the Regional Planning Council. Not trying to volunteer anyone, just wanted to provide that. If you are interested, shoot me an email or Rachel. Otherwise, it'll be having nominations from the floor at the next meeting. So, which again will be next April. So thanks.
All right, thank you. I will move on to public comments in general. We will now hear public comments on all business. We ask that you provide your name and address for the record, and please hold your comments for 2 minutes or less. If any members of the public wish to comment and joining us virtually, use your raise hand function feature, and you will be recognized, or dial *9 on your phone keypad. We'll send you a prompt to unmute your mic. Do we have anyone joining us virtually?
No hands raised online.
Okay. Do we have any members of the public attending in person?
No comments received, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any previous?
None received previously.
Thank you. With that, if there's no other business, then we stand adjourned at 11:29. Thank you.